Hours before my brother's wedding, a cryptic message warned, "Don't go, check your husband's garage." I thought it was a joke, until I opened the door. Then I froze. Everything was supposed to be perfect today. My brother Patrick was finally marrying Shannon, his college sweetheart, and I'd spent months helping plan every detail of their dream wedding. I'd covered part of the catering costs when money got tight, addressed invitations until my hand cramped, and chosen the perfect navy dress that would photograph beautifully without upstaging the bride. But now I stood frozen in my bathroom, staring at a text message from an unknown number that made my stomach drop to my feet. The words blurred as I read them again. Something about not going to the wedding, about checking my husband's garage, about seeing something before it was too late. The mascara wand trembled in my other hand as I reread the message. Don't go to the wedding. Check your husband's garage. You need to see this before it's too late. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale, uncertain, nothing like the confident maid of honor I was supposed to be in 3 hours. The excitement I'd felt waking up at dawn had evaporated completely, replaced by a cold dread that settled in my chest like a stone. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of truth and family protection. If you believe in standing up for those we love, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. I'd been so proud of how this day was unfolding. My alarm had gone off at 5:30, but I was already awake, too excited to sleep. Patrick was my baby brother, 2 years younger, and watching him find happiness with Shannon had filled me with a joy I hadn't experienced in years. Their relationship had been a steady, comfortable love story, college sweethearts who supported each other through graduation, job searches, and the inevitable growing pains of young adulthood. Shannon brought out the best in Patrick. She encouraged his dream of starting his own landscaping business, helped him organize his finances, and most importantly, made him laugh in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. When he'd proposed last Christmas, down on one knee in our parents' living room with the whole family watching, Shannon's tearful yes had been the highlight of our year. The wedding planning had become my project as much as theirs. Shannon's own family lived across the country, and her mother's health issues meant she couldn't travel for the ceremony. I'd stepped in eagerly, thrilled to help create the perfect day for them. We'd spent countless Saturday afternoons touring venues, tasting cake samples and debating flower arrangements. When Patrick mentioned their budget was getting tight after unexpected car repairs, I'd quietly covered the difference for the upgraded catering package without making it seem like charity. Every detail had been carefully planned. The ceremony was scheduled for noon at the historic church where our family had attended services for decades. The reception would be at the community center, decorated with white roses and fairy lights that Shannon had seen on Pinterest. I'd helped her find the perfect dress at a sample sale, and watched her cry happy tears when she tried it on. Patrick had rented a classic black tuxedo that made him look more handsome and grown-up than I'd ever seen him. But now, staring at this message, all those months of careful planning felt fragile and threatened. My phone buzzed again and I nearly dropped it. This time it was my mother. "Jamie, don't forget to pick up the boutonnieres from the florist. Patrick is getting nervous and keeps asking if everything is ready." The normalcy of her text felt surreal against the backdrop of the mysterious warning I'd just received. I tried to focus on my morning routine. Foundation, concealer, powder, each step automatic after years of practice. But my hands shook as I applied blush and I had to start over twice when I smudged my eyeliner. The woman in the mirror looked like me but felt like a stranger. Her navy dress hung perfectly, her hair fell in soft waves from yesterday's salon appointment. Her jewelry was elegant but understated. She looked like someone ready to celebrate her brother's happiness, not someone whose world might be about to crumble. Scott had left unusually early that morning, around 7:30. His explanation had been vague, something about needing to handle a few things before the ceremony. At the time, I'd assumed he meant picking up his dry cleaning or stopping by the office to check on a project that had been stressing him lately. But now his departure felt loaded with significance I'd missed. Our 8-year marriage had settled into comfortable patterns. Scott worked as an IT consultant, often putting in long hours during system upgrades or when clients faced technical emergencies. I'd grown accustomed to his irregular schedule, the late-night calls, the weekend work sessions. We weren't the passionate newlyweds we'd once been, but we were partners. Comfortable. Stable. Or so I'd thought. The kiss he'd given me goodbye that morning replayed in my mind differently now. It had been quick, distracted, more like a routine gesture than genuine affection. His coffee had sat untouched on the kitchen counter while he'd paced, checking his phone repeatedly. When I'd asked if everything was okay, he'd given me that forced smile I recognized from stressful work periods and assured me everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine, was it? I set my phone on the bathroom counter and tried to breathe normally. The rational part of my brain insisted this was ridiculous. Some random person was trying to ruin Patrick's wedding day with baseless accusations or cruel pranks. I should delete the message, finish getting ready, and focus on being the supportive sister Patrick needed today. Yet something deeper, more intuitive, whispered that I should pay attention. The garage key was buried in my jewelry box, underneath tangled necklaces and forgotten earrings. Scott had given it to me months ago during one of his organizational phases, insisting I should have access, just in case. I'd tossed it in with my jewelry and promptly forgotten about it. Now it felt significant, purposeful, like it had been waiting for this moment. Standing in my bedroom, fully dressed for the wedding, I held the small silver key and felt the weight of choice. I could ignore the message, trust in my marriage, and focus on Patrick's happiness. Or I could walk outside to that innocent-looking garage and potentially discover something that would change everything. The clock on my nightstand showed 9:15. The wedding was at noon. I had time to investigate and still make it to the ceremony, assuming I found nothing more alarming than old paint cans and holiday decorations. But as I walked toward my front door, key clutched in my sweating palm, I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. The garage door groaned on its hinges as I pushed it open, a familiar sound I'd heard countless times before. Sunlight streamed through the doorway, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows across the concrete floor. My eyes swept the interior, taking in Scott's old Honda covered with its blue tarp, the metal shelves lined with plastic storage bins, and the familiar clutter of our shared life. For a brief, wonderful moment, relief flooded through me. Everything looked exactly as it should. Paint cans stacked neatly in the corner, our artificial Christmas tree leaning against the far wall, camping gear we hadn't used in 3 years gathering dust on the top shelf. The garage smelled like motor oil, old cardboard, and that particular mustiness of stored belongings. Completely normal, completely innocent. I almost laughed at myself. Here I was, dressed for my brother's wedding, standing in our garage because of some random text message from a stranger. The paranoia felt ridiculous now, embarrassing even. I could already imagine how I'd tell Scott about this later, how we'd shake our heads at the cruel prank someone had played on such an important day. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye that didn't belong. Tucked behind a stack of paint cans, partially concealed by what looked like an old beach towel, was a small wooden chest I'd never seen before. The chest itself wasn't particularly remarkable. Maybe the size of a shoebox, made of dark wood with simple brass hinges. But its placement was deliberate, hidden, like someone had tried to conceal it quickly. My heart began racing again as I approached it. The beach towel draped over it was faded blue and white stripes, and I didn't recognize it either. With trembling fingers, I pulled the towel away and stared at the chest. It felt foreign in our space, an intruder among our familiar belongings. The lid opened easily, revealing contents that made my breath catch in my throat. Nestled inside were women's belongings that definitely weren't mine. A delicate silver bracelet with tiny charms, a heart, a star, something that might have been an initial. I'd seen it before but couldn't place where. Matching earrings caught the morning light, their small diamonds sparkling against the dark wood interior. There was a small bottle of expensive perfume, the kind I'd always considered too pricey for everyday wear. The brand was familiar from department store displays, elegant and sophisticated. Beneath the perfume was a silk scarf in soft pastels, still smelling faintly of that expensive fragrance. Each item felt like a puzzle piece, and I had the sinking feeling I knew what picture they were forming. My hands shook as I moved things aside, searching deeper into the chest with a horrible fascination. That's when I found the photographs. The first one I pulled out made my blood turn to ice. Scott's face smiled back at me, but he wasn't alone. His arms were wrapped around a woman with blonde hair and a radiant smile, Shannon. My brother's fiancée. My future sister-in-law. The woman who was supposed to walk down the aisle in 3 hours. They weren't just standing together for a friendly photo. This was intimate, romantic. Scott's hand rested on Shannon's waist in a way that spoke of familiarity, of ownership. Her head tilted toward his shoulder with complete comfort and trust. They looked happy. Devastatingly, completely happy. With growing horror, I flipped through more photographs. Dozens of them, scattered throughout the chest like guilty secrets demanding to be discovered. Shannon laughing as Scott spun her around on a beach I didn't recognize. Definitely not anywhere we'd vacationed together. The two of them sharing an ice cream cone, Shannon playfully stealing a bite while Scott grinned at her with pure adoration. The photos spanned different seasons. Here was Shannon in a summer dress, Scott's arm around her shoulders as they posed in front of what looked like a mountain vista. There she was again in a cozy sweater, leaves falling around them in an autumn park. Winter photos showed them bundled up together, faces flushed from cold and laughter. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This wasn't a drunken mistake at some party. This was a relationship sustained and secret, playing out parallel to both their official lives. My vision blurred as the full scope of the betrayal hit me. How long had this been going on? How many times had Shannon sat at our dinner table planning wedding details with me, all while carrying on with my husband? How many nights had Scott come home late, claiming work emergencies when he'd actually been with her? Beneath the photographs I found something even worse: printed copies of text message conversations. The paper was slightly warm from being pressed against the wood, and I recognized Scott's phone number immediately. The messages were recent, some from just yesterday. Shannon, I can't wait much longer, Scott. Pretending with Patrick is killing me. Scott, after the wedding we'll figure it out. Just a few more hours, babe. Shannon, I love you. Not him. This marriage is just necessary right now. Scott, once you're legally his wife, we can plan our real future together. The words swam before my eyes as their meaning sank in. Shannon wasn't just cheating on Patrick. She was using him. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a calculated business transaction. Marriage for security, for legal benefits, for whatever advantage she could gain, while she planned to continue her real relationship with Scott immediately afterward. More messages revealed the depth of their planning. Scott, the reception ends at 5. I can pick you up at 7 from your apartment. Shannon, what about Jamie? Won't she expect you home? Scott, I'll tell her I'm helping clean up the venue. She trusts me completely. Shannon, this is so much harder than I thought it would be. Patrick keeps talking about our honeymoon plans. Scott, 2 more days and we can stop pretending. You're stronger than you know. I sat back on my heels, the printed messages scattered around me like evidence of a crime. Because that's what this was. A crime against Patrick, against me, against the very concept of family and trust and love. The garage suddenly felt suffocating. The innocent storage space had become a vault of secrets, a hiding place for the evidence of the most devastating betrayal I could imagine. My husband and my brother's fiancée weren't just having an affair. They were actively conspiring to destroy Patrick's life while using him for Shannon's benefit. The clock on my phone showed 9:45. In 2 hours and 15 minutes, Patrick would be standing at the altar, believing he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. Instead, he'd be signing up for a life built on lies, manipulation, and calculation. I carefully gathered the photographs and messages, my hands moving with surprising steadiness despite the chaos in my mind. Someone had sent me that warning text for a reason. Someone wanted me to find this evidence, to know the truth before it was too late. And now I had to decide what to do with it. My first instinct was to storm out of that garage, drive straight to the wedding venue and drag Shannon away from the altar in front of everyone. I wanted to scream, to expose her publicly, to watch her perfect facade crumble before our entire family and all the guests who'd traveled to witness what they thought was a love story. The rage burning in my chest demanded immediate action, swift justice for the cruelty she was about to inflict on Patrick. But as I knelt there among the scattered evidence of their betrayal, something shifted inside me. The white-hot fury transformed into something colder, more calculating. A voice in my head, maybe my mother's, maybe my own survival instinct, whispered that acting rashly would be exactly what Scott and Shannon could use against me. I could already hear their denials. Jamie's always been jealous of our happiness. She's unstable, trying to ruin the wedding out of spite. Those photos are old, taken out of context. She fabricated the text messages because she can't stand seeing Patrick succeed where her own marriage is failing. They could gaslight Patrick into believing I was the problem, the jealous sister who couldn't bear to see him happy. Without careful handling, I might end up being the villain in this story while they painted themselves as victims of my alleged mental breakdown. Patrick's future hung in the balance, and I wouldn't let my emotions jeopardize his chance to escape this trap. I needed to be smarter than my pain, more strategic than my rage. My hands had stopped shaking as this realization settled over me. I pulled out my phone and began methodically photographing everything. Each picture of Scott and Shannon together felt like gathering ammunition for a war I'd never wanted to fight, but one I was now determined to win. The camera clicked softly as I captured every angle of their intimate moments. Scott spinning Shannon on that unknown beach. Their faces pressed together in what looked like a restaurant booth. Shannon wearing the silver bracelet while Scott's arm encircled her waist. Each image was a nail in the coffin of their deception. I photographed the text message printouts, making sure the phone numbers were clearly visible. Scott's contact information at the top of each conversation thread would be impossible to deny. The dates and timestamps showed this wasn't ancient history. These messages were from yesterday, from this week, from throughout the months Patrick and Shannon had been planning their wedding. The personal items required more careful documentation. I arranged the bracelet, earrings, and perfume bottle for clear photos, then captured close-ups that would show details impossible to fake. The scarf still held traces of Shannon's perfume, and I photographed the designer label that would be easily recognizable to anyone who knew her shopping habits. Working with clinical precision helped keep the emotional tsunami at bay. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about protecting Patrick from a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient stepping stone to her real life with my husband. When every piece of evidence was thoroughly documented, I faced the challenging task of returning everything exactly as I'd found it. The wooden chest had to be positioned at precisely the right angle behind the paint cans. The beach towel needed to drape naturally over it, concealing the chest without looking deliberately arranged. Each item went back in its exact location within the chest. The photographs scattered just as they'd been, some face up, others tucked beneath personal belongings. The printed messages folded and placed beneath the photos in the same order I'd discovered them. Even the perfume bottle's position mattered, tilted slightly to the left, just as Scott had left it. This level of deception felt foreign to everything I'd been raised to believe about honesty and directness. But the stakes were too high for moral purism. If Scott and Shannon discovered their secret was compromised before I could protect Patrick, they might accelerate their timeline, pressure him into a quick courthouse ceremony, or simply disappear together and leave him wondering what went wrong. The element of surprise was Patrick's only advantage now. I pulled the garage door closed and locked it, my movements careful and deliberate. No trace of my presence could remain. To Scott, this had to seem like just another ordinary morning, another step toward the elaborate charade he and Shannon were orchestrating. Walking back toward my house, I caught my reflection in my car's side mirror. Somehow I looked exactly the same as I had an hour ago. Same navy dress, same carefully styled hair, same wedding-appropriate makeup. But behind my eyes lurked knowledge that changed everything. Evidence that would either save Patrick or destroy our entire family, depending on how skillfully I handled the next few hours. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. Every familiar street, every routine turn seemed loaded with new significance. I passed the coffee shop where Patrick and Shannon had their first date, the park where they'd gotten engaged, the bridal shop where I'd helped Shannon find her dress. All of it had been built on lies, and I was the only one who knew. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Patrick's getting nervous. Can you come early to help calm him down?" The irony was devastating. She wanted me to reassure Patrick about his future with Shannon, not knowing I was driving toward him with evidence that would shatter that future completely. At red lights, I gripped the steering wheel and practiced staying composed. Patrick would need me to be strong, rational, supportive, not the emotional wreck I felt like inside. The evidence in my phone was like carrying fire, burning with the potential to either save or destroy the brother I loved more than anyone in the world. Each mile brought me closer to the most difficult conversation of my life, but also closer to preventing the most devastating mistake Patrick could ever make. I pulled into my parents' driveway and sat for a moment, gathering courage. Through the upstairs window, I could see Patrick moving around his childhood bedroom, probably adjusting his tie or checking his appearance one final time. He looked so happy, so ready for his new life, completely unaware that the woman he was about to marry had never loved him at all. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the front door, knowing that once I stepped inside and spoke the truth, neither Patrick nor I would ever be the same again. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother appeared, beaming with excitement, her face glowing with the joy only a mother feels on her child's wedding day. Jamie. Perfect timing. Patrick's upstairs getting ready, but he's been pacing for the last hour. I think he needs his big sister to calm his nerves. If only she knew the kind of nerves I was about to give him. I climbed the familiar stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway was lined with family photos, Patrick and me as children, school pictures, graduation shots, moments of happiness that now felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. I paused outside his bedroom door, gathering courage for what came next. I knocked softly and heard his voice call out, "Come in." Patrick stood in front of his childhood mirror, adjusting his tie with the same nervous energy he'd shown before school presentations and job interviews. He looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, more grown up than I'd ever seen him. His face lit up when he saw me. "Jamie, thank goodness you're here. I can't get this tie right and Mom keeps crying every time she looks at me. I think I might actually throw up before we get to the church." The happiness in his voice was like a knife to my heart. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to find words for the impossible conversation ahead. "Patrick," I said quietly, "I need to show you something. And I need you to sit down." Something in my tone made his smile fade. "What's wrong? You look like someone died." In a way, someone had. The Patrick who trusted completely, who believed in fairy tale endings, who thought he'd found his soulmate. That version of my brother was about to disappear forever. "I need you to stay calm," I said, pulling out my phone. "What I'm about to show you is going to be devastating, but I need you to see it before you walk down that aisle." His face went pale. "Jamie, you're scaring me." I held out my phone, displaying the first photograph I'd taken in the garage. Scott and Shannon embracing on that unknown beach, looking blissfully happy together. Patrick stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. I watched his face cycle through confusion, his brain trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then disbelief, as if this couldn't possibly be real. Recognition came next as the reality of the image sank in. Finally, devastating comprehension settled over his features like a shadow. "What is this?" he whispered. "I found it in Scott's garage this morning. Someone sent me a message telling me to look." I swiped to the next photo, then the next. "There are dozens of them, Patrick." His hands began to shake as he took the phone from me, scrolling through image after image of the woman he loved with my husband. I watched my brother's world crumble in real time, each photograph destroying another piece of his trust, his future, his faith in love itself. "How long?" The words barely escaped his throat. "Months, maybe longer." The photos spanned different seasons. I sat beside him on his childhood bed, the same spot where I'd comforted him through nightmares and heartbreaks years ago. "Patrick, there's more." Text messages. I showed him the printed conversations, watching him read Shannon's words about pretending with him, about the marriage being necessary, about planning her real future with Scott. Each message was another blow, and I could see him physically recoiling from the screen. "She never loved me," he said, his voice hollow. "This whole time she was just using me." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." He was quiet for a long time, reading through the messages again, studying the photos with the desperate attention of someone hoping to find evidence that this was all a mistake. But there was no ambiguity in Scott and Shannon's happiness together, no way to misinterpret their intimate conversations about deceiving him. Finally, he looked up at me. "What do we do?" The question surprised me. I'd expected him to fall apart, to rage or cry or refuse to believe the evidence. Instead, Patrick was asking for strategy. The hurt was there. I could see it in his eyes. But underneath was something harder, more determined. "We have options," I said carefully. "We could confront them privately, cancel the wedding quietly, tell the guests there was an emergency. Or we could let them face the consequences publicly. Let everyone see who Shannon really is." Patrick was quiet, processing. "All those people came here for us. For what they thought was our love story. My college friends drove 8 hours. Shannon's aunt flew in from California. I know. But they also deserve to know they're not witnessing a real wedding. They're watching someone manipulate and use you. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the street where he'd learned to ride a bike, where we'd played as children. She was going to go through with it, he said. Actually marry me, knowing she was planning to continue with Scott. The messages suggest they were going to figure out how to be together after the wedding. You would have been her legal husband while she lived her real life with him. Using me for what? Money? Status? Health insurance? Does it matter? The point is, she was willing to destroy your life for her convenience. Patrick turned back to me and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before, a cold anger that made him look older, harder. She deserves to face this publicly. In front of everyone who thinks she's so perfect. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no taking it back. She made her choice when she decided to betray me. When she decided to use me. He straightened his shoulders. How do we do it? We spent the next 40 minutes planning every detail. Patrick would handle the moment at the altar when the officiant asked for objections. I would stay in the front row, ready to provide evidence if Shannon tried to deny or deflect. We discussed how to tell our parents, how to handle the inevitable questions from guests, how to minimize the damage to innocent people caught in the aftermath. What about Scott? Patrick asked. He'll probably show up when Shannon calls him in a panic. I'll handle him. This is going to destroy both our marriages. My marriage was already destroyed, I said. I just didn't know it yet. As we prepared to leave for the venue, something strange happened. The initial shock and heartbreak began settling into a calm, focused determination. We weren't just victims anymore. We were allies, united in protecting our family from people who would use and betray us. Patrick adjusted his tie one final time, but now he wasn't preparing for a wedding. He was preparing for battle, and I had never been more proud of his strength. Ready? I asked. He nodded. Let's go end this. The drive to the church felt like traveling through a dream sequence. Patrick sat beside me in the passenger seat, unnaturally calm for someone whose life had just imploded. Our parents followed in their car, blissfully unaware that their carefully planned celebration was about to become something entirely different. You don't have to do this, I said one final time as we pulled into the church parking lot. We could still handle this privately. No, Patrick replied, his voice steady. She made this choice. She can live with the consequences. The historic stone church looked beautiful in the late morning sunlight. White ribbons fluttered from the entrance and I could see guests streaming inside, dressed in their finest clothes and carrying cameras to capture what they thought would be joyful memories. My stomach twisted knowing what was actually about to unfold. Inside, the sanctuary was transformed. Shannon's Pinterest vision had come to life perfectly. White roses and baby's breath adorned every pew, fairy lights twinkled from the ceiling, and soft classical music played from the organ. Everything looked exactly as we'd planned during those countless Saturday afternoons, when I'd believed I was helping create the perfect day for two people who truly loved each other. I took my place in the front row, smoothing my navy dress and checking that my phone was easily accessible. Around me, our extended family chatted excitedly. Patrick's college friends filled several rows, some traveling from across the country for this moment. Shannon's side was smaller but no less enthusiastic, her aunt from California, a few childhood friends, co-workers from the marketing firm where she'd worked before quitting to focus on wedding planning. The processional began and my heart started racing. Patrick walked down the aisle with our father, looking handsome and composed. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set just slightly too tight. He caught my eye as he passed and I nodded, a silent reminder that I was here, that we were in this together. He took his position at the altar, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. The officiant, Pastor Williams, who had baptized both Patrick and me, smiled warmly at the gathered crowd. He had no idea he was about to witness something unprecedented in his 40 years of performing wedding ceremonies. Then the wedding march began and Shannon appeared at the back of the church. She looked absolutely radiant. Her dress, the one I'd helped her find at that sample sale, fit perfectly, cascading around her in layers of silk and lace. Her veil trailed behind her like something from a fairy tale. She'd never looked more beautiful, more bride-like, more convincing in the role she was playing. The contrast between her apparent joy and the ugly truth I carried felt surreal. Here was a woman walking toward her victim with a smile, about to promise him love and fidelity while planning to betray him within hours of saying, "I do." The audacity of it took my breath away. Shannon's eyes were locked on Patrick as she walked down the aisle, her smile never wavering. She looked like every bride should look, happy, nervous, glowing with love. But I knew now it was all performance, carefully constructed to serve her purposes. She reached the altar and took Patrick's hands, still smiling. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with his usual warm words about love, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Patrick and Shannon in holy matrimony," Pastor Williams continued. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with reverence, discretion, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted." Shannon squeezed Patrick's hands, probably interpreting his stillness as wedding nerves rather than the calm before a storm. The ceremony proceeded normally for several minutes. Readings about love from Corinthians, Pastor Williams speaking about the commitment they were making to each other, traditional words that now felt like mockery given what I knew about Shannon's real intentions. Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. If any person present knows of any lawful impediment why these two may not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The church fell into that traditional moment of silence, guests probably expecting the usual pause before the ceremony continued. Instead, Patrick's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." The audible gasp that swept through the congregation was immediate and overwhelming. Heads turned, voices murmured, and I felt the entire atmosphere of the church shift from celebration to confusion to growing tension. Shannon's face went white, then flushed deep red as panic replaced her bridal glow. "What are you doing?" she hissed, trying to maintain her smile for the guests while her eyes showed pure terror. "I'm objecting to marrying someone who's been having an affair with my sister's husband," Patrick said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 guests sat frozen, trying to process what they'd just heard. Pastor Williams looked completely bewildered, clearly having never encountered anything like this in his decades of performing ceremonies. Shannon's composure began cracking visibly. "That's not... Patrick, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Patrick replied, his voice calm but carrying through the church's acoustics. "I have photographs, Shannon. Text messages. Everything." I watched from the front row as Shannon's perfect facade started crumbling. Her desperate eyes swept the crowd, landing on me with a look of pure hatred. "This is Jamie's doing," she declared, her voice getting shrill. "She's always been jealous that I was joining the family. She fabricated this." But Patrick was ready. He pulled out his phone, holding up one of the photos for Shannon to see. "Did Jamie fabricate you kissing Scott on a beach in Mexico? Did she fake these text messages about your real future together?" Shannon's final attempts at denial became increasingly desperate. "Fine. Yes, we had feelings for each other, but I chose you. I'm here, aren't I? I was going to be faithful." "The messages are from yesterday, Shannon," Patrick said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the church. "You were planning to continue this after today." That's when Shannon's facade shattered completely. The beautiful, composed bride disappeared, replaced by someone ugly and desperate. She screamed at Patrick, at me, at the guests who sat in stunned silence watching her meltdown. Finally, she ripped off her veil, threw it at Patrick's feet, and stormed down the aisle in her wedding dress, the train trailing behind her like the remnants of broken promises. The church erupted in chaos as she pushed through the doors, leaving 300 people and one devastated groom to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. The church had emptied slowly after Shannon's dramatic exit, guests filing out in stunned clusters, whispering among themselves about what they'd just witnessed. Some approached Patrick with awkward condolences, others simply left without knowing what to say. The fairy lights that had seemed so magical an hour earlier now illuminated an empty sanctuary that felt more like a crime scene than a wedding venue. I was helping Patrick remove the boutonnieres from his tuxedo jacket when my phone rang. Scott's name appeared on the screen and my stomach clenched. "Jamie, what the hell is going on?" "Shannon just called me crying, saying the wedding was cancelled. She's not making any sense." "I'm sure she's not," I replied calmly. "Where are you?" "At the office, finishing up some work before the reception." "What happened?" The lie came so easily to him even now. You should come to the church, Scott. We need to talk. He arrived 30 minutes later, his face pale and drawn. The moment he walked into the sanctuary and saw me standing there with Patrick, Pastor Williams, and my parents, he understood that his carefully constructed world had collapsed. You destroyed everything, he said, his voice hollow. No, I replied, surprised by how steady I sounded. You did that when you decided to have an affair with my brother's fiancé. You did that when you helped her plan to use Patrick for her own benefit while she continued her real relationship with you. Scott's attempts at justification were pathetic. He claimed I'd misunderstood the situation, that the photos were old, that he and Shannon had ended things months ago. But his guilt was written across every feature of his face, and each lie only made him look more desperate. Those text messages were from yesterday, Scott, I said, pulling out my phone to show him his own words. You were planning to pick her up from her apartment after the reception. He crumbled then, admitting to the affair but trying to paint it as mutual attraction that had gotten out of hand. He never once apologized for the pain he'd caused Patrick, never acknowledged the cruelty of their deception. Instead, he focused on his own wounded feelings as if he were the victim in this situation. By evening he was gone. He packed whatever fit in his car and left, muttering about finding a hotel until he could make permanent arrangements. I watched from the window as he drove away, feeling nothing but relief that I'd never have to pretend to trust him again. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and emotional processing. Each document I signed in my lawyer's office felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been stolen. Division of assets, custody of our shared belongings, the dissolution of 8 years of marriage reduced to signatures on official forms. Patrick moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily, and surprisingly, it helped both of us heal. We spent long evenings on our parents' porch swing, the same spot where we'd solved childhood problems and shared teenage secrets. He was heartbroken but grateful, struggling with trust issues but relieved to have escaped Shannon's manipulation before it was too late. I don't know how I'll ever trust anyone again, he admitted one evening as we watched fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. You will, I assured him. Not everyone is like Shannon. You'll learn to recognize the signs, to trust your instincts. This experience will make you stronger, more discerning. How are you so calm about all this? Your marriage is over too. I considered his question carefully, because I realized now that my marriage was already over. I just didn't know it. Scott had checked out emotionally long before Shannon came along. At least now I can start building something real instead of living in a fantasy. Our family rallied around us in ways that surprised me. Aunts and uncles called to offer support. Cousins reached out with words of encouragement. Most surprisingly, several family members admitted they'd had suspicions about Shannon but hadn't known how to voice their concerns. She always seemed too good to be true, my mother confessed. Too eager to please, too perfect in every conversation. But I thought I was just being an overprotective mother-in-law. My father was more direct. Something about her never sat right with me. She was always performing, never just being herself. The empty spaces in my house where Scott's belongings had been didn't feel lonely. They felt like possibilities. I turned his home office back into the art studio I'd given up years earlier, setting up an easel near the window where the morning light was best. The first painting I completed was abstract, swirls of deep blues and bright golds that somehow captured both the pain and the liberation I felt. Quiet evenings that had once felt suffocating now felt peaceful. I rediscovered books I'd neglected, tried recipes I'd always wanted to attempt, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. The independence that had been forced upon me gradually became a choice, a preference for authentic solitude over comfortable deception. The poetic justice of how things unfolded became clear within weeks. Shannon and Scott's relationship, built on secrecy and the thrill of betrayal, couldn't survive in the harsh light of exposure. Without the excitement of deception and the promise of having everything they wanted, their connection crumbled quickly. Shannon left town within a month, according to mutual acquaintances who reported she'd taken a job in another state. Scott moved across the country for what he claimed was a career opportunity, but I suspected he was running from the shame of having his true character revealed to everyone who mattered. They both simply disappeared from our lives, leaving behind only the valuable lesson of what happens when people choose manipulation over authenticity, deception over truth. My revenge hadn't been explosive or dramatic. It hadn't involved elaborate schemes or public humiliation beyond what they'd brought upon themselves. It had been something far more powerful. Truth delivered at exactly the right moment to protect the person I loved most. The greatest victory wasn't in destroying my enemies, but in saving Patrick from a lifetime of lies and saving myself from the prison of other people's deceptions. Sometimes the most profound justice comes not from punishment, but from liberation. The freedom to build authentic lives on foundations of truth rather than comfortable illusions. As I sat in my reclaimed art studio painting my new reality, I realized I'd never been more grateful for a cryptic text message that had arrived just in time to change everything. If this story of family protection and truth had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Patrick objected at the altar, exposing Shannon's lies in front of everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Sophia Miller, 28, and yesterday I was bubbling with excitement for my brother Jason's wedding. The rehearsal dinner at my parents' home was perfect: laughter, champagne, and family everywhere. I can't wait for tomorrow, I announced, raising my glass. That's when Aunt Patricia froze, her champagne flute slipping from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The room fell silent as everyone stared at her pale face. In that moment, I had no idea how those 5 innocent words would shatter our family forever. Before I continue this story that changed everything for us, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever experienced a family secret that turned your world upside down. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Jason and I have always been inseparable, despite the 4-year age gap between us. At 32, my brother had found his perfect match in Megan Parker, 29, a kindergarten teacher with kind eyes and a laugh that filled rooms. They'd been together for 5 years, having met through mutual friends at a charity fundraiser. I still remember how Jason called me that night, uncharacteristically animated, saying he'd met someone special. Over the years, I watched their relationship blossom into something truly beautiful, the kind of love most people spend their lives searching for. Our family had always been close-knit. Our parents, Thomas and Laura Miller, had been married for 35 years and still looked at each other with genuine affection. Dad worked as an architect, Mom as a high school English teacher, and they'd created a warm, loving home for Jason and me in our suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Our extended family was just as important to us. Holiday gatherings, summer barbecues, birthday celebrations. We rarely missed an opportunity to come together. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of wedding preparations. As a bridesmaid and Jason's only sister, I found myself caught up in a flurry of dress fittings, cake tastings, and late-night phone calls with my brother when he panicked about his vows. Megan had asked me to help choose the flowers, knowing my background in design would come in handy. We'd spent countless hours scrolling through Pinterest boards and visiting florists until we found the perfect arrangement of white roses and blue hydrangeas. The rehearsal dinner brought everyone together the night before the big day. Grandmother Elizabeth, 82, commanded attention as always, regaling Megan's younger cousins with stories from her youth. Despite her age, Grandma's mind remained razor-sharp, and she never missed a detail. She'd been particularly invested in this wedding, having adored Megan from their first meeting. Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother, sat with his wife, Aunt Patricia. At 55, Patricia had always been the quieter presence at family gatherings, polite but somewhat reserved. I'd noticed she seemed a bit distant throughout the wedding planning process, but I'd chalked it up to her naturally introverted personality. My cousins Amber and Kyle, their children, had grown up alongside Jason and me, sharing summer vacations and holiday traditions. Amber, 25, was also a bridesmaid, while Kyle, 23, would be one of the groomsmen. Megan's parents, Brian and Jennifer Parker, had flown in from California the previous week. They were friendly and clearly affluent. Brian owned a successful tech company, and Jennifer managed their considerable charitable foundation. They generously insisted on covering most of the wedding expenses, including the breathtaking vineyard venue where tomorrow's ceremony would take place. The Willows has been booked for over a year, Mom had told me proudly as we drove to the venue for the final walkthrough. It's the most sought-after wedding location in the state. The estate featured rolling hills covered in grapevines, a restored 19th-century mansion, and a reception hall with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lake. Tomorrow, white chairs would line the lawn where Jason and Megan would say their vows beneath a flower-covered arch, with the setting sun painting the sky behind them. I'd noticed some tension between my parents and Aunt Patricia during the planning process. Once, when discussing seating arrangements, I'd walked into the kitchen to find Mom and Patricia in what appeared to be a heated discussion that abruptly ended when they saw me. Another time, Patricia had declined to attend Megan's bridal shower, citing a migraine. These instances seemed minor at the time, but in retrospect, they were the first warning signs. Patricia seemed particularly uncomfortable around Megan. During the rehearsal dinner, I noticed her barely making eye contact with the bride-to-be, despite Megan's warm attempts to engage her in conversation. When Megan asked for family recipe suggestions to add to their collection, Patricia had muttered something about keeping things separate before changing the subject entirely. "Is everything okay with Aunt Patricia?" I'd asked Mom quietly while helping to arrange dessert plates. "She's just emotional about the wedding," Mom had replied, too quickly. "You know how she gets." But I didn't know. In all the years of family events, I'd never seen Patricia behave quite like this. Still, I pushed my concerns aside. Tomorrow was Jason and Megan's day, and nothing was going to spoil it, or so I thought. The rehearsal at the venue had gone smoothly that afternoon. The wedding coordinator, a no-nonsense woman named Valerie, had guided us through our positions and timing. Jason had pretended to swoon when Megan walked down the practice aisle, making everyone laugh. The pastor had reminded us about the importance of speaking clearly into the microphones. Everything was falling perfectly into place. Back at my parents' house for the dinner afterward, the atmosphere was jovial. Dad had set up tables in the backyard, strung with fairy lights that twinkled as the sun set. Mom's garden provided a beautiful backdrop, her prized roses in full bloom. The catering company had outdone themselves with a selection of Jason and Megan's favorite foods, from elegant seafood appetizers to comfort food classics. As champagne flowed and conversations hummed around me, I felt a deep contentment. In less than 24 hours, my brother would be married to the woman he loved, surrounded by everyone who mattered to them. What could possibly go wrong? The rehearsal dinner was in full swing by 8 o'clock. The backyard of my parents' home had transformed into an enchanted space under the May evening sky. String lights crisscrossed above the tables, creating a canopy of warm light against the deepening blue. The catering staff moved efficiently between guests, refilling wine glasses and clearing empty plates. The gentle clinking of silverware and waves of laughter created the perfect soundtrack for our family celebration. I'd been floating from table to table, making sure everyone had what they needed, sharing in the excitement that permeated the air. Jason and Megan sat at the center table, her hand resting comfortably in his, their heads occasionally tilting together to share private words amid the public celebration. They looked radiant, both glowing with anticipation for tomorrow's ceremony. Around 9:30, Dad stood up, champagne flute in hand, to make a toast. As the patriarch of our family, his words carried special weight. He spoke eloquently about watching Jason grow from a curious little boy into the accomplished man before us, about welcoming Megan into our family, about the journey of marriage that lay ahead of them. Tears glistened in many eyes as he finished. "To Jason and Megan," he said, raising his glass higher. "May tomorrow be the beautiful beginning of your lifetime together." To Jason and Megan, everyone echoed, glasses lifting in unison. The momentum of toasts continued. Megan's father spoke next, followed by her maid of honor. When the formal toasts concluded, conversations resumed and people began to mingle again. I found myself standing near the dessert table with Jason, Megan, and several family members, including Aunt Patricia. The conversation turned to last-minute wedding details. I still can't believe we're actually here, Megan said, her face flushed with happiness. After all the planning, it's finally happening. I know. I agreed enthusiastically, raising my glass. I can't wait for tomorrow. The words had barely left my mouth when I heard the distinct sound of glass shattering. All eyes turned to Aunt Patricia. Her champagne flute lay in pieces at her feet, the golden liquid seeping into the patio stones. But more alarming was Patricia herself. The color had drained completely from her face, her eyes wide with what I could only describe as horror. She looked as though she'd seen a ghost, or perhaps more accurately, as though she'd become one herself. Patricia? Uncle Robert reached for his wife's arm. Are you all right? For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on me, then shifted to Jason and Megan. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she finally seemed to collect herself. I'm sorry, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what happened. The glass just slipped. A server quickly approached with a broom and dustpan, and the moment began to pass. Conversation tentatively resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. An undercurrent of tension had replaced the easy joy of moments before. Let me help you clean up, Megan offered kindly to Patricia, apparently attributing the older woman's reaction to simple embarrassment over the broken glass. No, Patricia said sharply, then softened. Thank you, but I'm fine. I think I just need some air. She walked briskly toward the side of the house, with Uncle Robert following close behind. From where I stood, I could see them engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Patricia's hands moved animatedly while Robert seemed to be trying to calm her. My father had noticed too. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way over to them. I watched as he joined their huddle, his expression growing increasingly serious as Patricia spoke. Something was very wrong. Driven by concern and curiosity, I casually moved closer, pretending to adjust some flowers on a nearby table. I couldn't hear everything, but fragments of their conversation reached me. Can't let this happen, Thomas, Patricia was saying, her voice urgent. She doesn't know? I heard her ask my father, who shook his head. It's not the right time, Dad responded firmly. We've discussed this. Patricia's response was too quiet to catch, but the word irresponsible floated toward me. Jason appeared at my side, making me jump slightly. What's going on? He asked, nodding toward the three adults in serious conversation. I have no idea, I replied honestly. Aunt Patricia seems upset about something. A crease formed between Jason's eyebrows. Mom's acting weird too. She practically sprinted after Dad when she saw him talking to Patricia. Sure enough, our mother had joined the group, her posture tense. I watched as she placed a restraining hand on Patricia's arm, only to have it shaken off. When they finally returned to the party, the four of them wore carefully composed expressions that didn't reach their eyes. Mom was especially attentive to Megan for the remainder of the evening, while Dad stayed close to Jason. Patricia avoided both the bride and groom, keeping to the peripheral of the gathering until she and Uncle Robert made an early departure. We have a long day tomorrow, Patricia said as she hugged me goodbye, her arms stiff and her smile forced. Get some rest, Sophia. As guests began to leave, I tried to question Jason about what he thought might be happening, but he seemed distracted. Probably just wedding stress, he deflected, though the look he exchanged with our father suggested otherwise. Don't worry about it, sis. By 11, only immediate family remained, clearing the last of the dishes and packing leftover food. Megan kissed Jason goodnight. Tradition dictated they spend their last night as single people apart and left with her parents for their hotel. Jason would be staying at the same hotel, but in a separate room. Everything's fine, Mom assured me when I asked her directly about Patricia's reaction. Your aunt gets emotional at big family events. You know how she is. But I didn't know. And their insistence that nothing was wrong only convinced me further that something significant was being hidden. As I lay in my childhood bedroom that night, sleep eluded me. My mind replayed the evening's events on loop, Patricia's face as the glass slipped from her fingers, the hushed, urgent conversation, the strange tension that had settled over our family like a heavy blanket. Something about my innocent comment, I can't wait for tomorrow. had triggered a reaction that seemed wildly disproportionate. What could possibly be so wrong about tomorrow? What did Aunt Patricia know that the rest of us didn't? The red numbers on my bedside clock flipped to 12 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a text message. The sudden illumination in my dark bedroom made me blink as I reached for the device. "Meet me on the porch." "Now." "Patricia," I sat up, heart racing. Aunt Patricia had left hours ago. What was she doing back at my parents' house at midnight? And more importantly, what was so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning? Slipping out of bed, I pulled on a cardigan over my pajamas and carefully opened my bedroom door. The house was quiet, my parents presumably asleep after the long evening. I crept down the stairs, avoiding the third step that had creaked since my childhood, and made my way to the front door. The porch light was off, but the full moon provided enough illumination to see Aunt Patricia sitting on the swing, her posture rigid. She didn't look up when I opened the door. "Aunt Patricia?" I whispered, closing the door softly behind me. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" She finally turned to me, and I was struck by how tired she looked, beyond the physical exhaustion of a long day. This was a bone-deep weariness that seemed to have aged her overnight. "Sit down, Sophia," she said, patting the space beside her on the swing. I did as she asked, the old chains creaking slightly under our combined weight. For several long moments, Patricia said nothing, just stared out into the darkness of the front yard. "I shouldn't be here," she finally said. "Your father would be furious if he knew." "Knew what?" I prompted gently. Patricia took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "I've been carrying this for months now. Ever since Jason announced the engagement. I thought your parents would handle it. I thought surely they wouldn't let it get this far." "Let what get this far? The wedding?" She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Sophia, what I'm about to tell you will change everything. And once you know, you can't unknow it. Are you sure you want that responsibility?" A chill ran down my spine despite the mild May night. If something's wrong, I need to know. Especially if it affects Jason. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering courage. 25 years ago, your mother and Brian Parker had an affair." The words hung in the air between us, incomprehensible at first. My mother and Brian Parker? Megan's father? They hadn't even known each other 25 years ago, had they? "That's not possible," I said automatically. "Mom and Dad have been together since college. And the Parkers live in California. We only met them when Jason started dating Megan." "The Parkers moved to California 23 years ago," Patricia corrected. "Before that, they lived here, in this very neighborhood. Brian and Jennifer, your parents, Robert and I, we were all friends. Until the affair." My mind reeled, trying to process this information. But why would no one ever mention this? Why would Mom and Dad act like they were meeting the Parkers for the first time when Jason introduced them? Patricia's laugh was hollow. "Because that's the story they all agreed to tell. After what happened, the Parkers moved away. We all decided it would be better to make a clean break. When Jason brought Megan home 5 years ago and introduced her parents, everyone played along with the charade. This doesn't make sense, I insisted, though a creeping dread was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. Even if there was an affair, what does that have to do with the wedding? Patricia turned to face me fully then, her expression grave. Sophia, the affair happened while your father was away on a 6-month project in Europe. Your mother was pregnant when he returned. The implication of her words hit me like a physical blow. No, I breathed. You can't mean. Jason and Megan are half-siblings, Patricia said, her voice barely audible. They share the same biological father. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the swing to steady myself, ball rising in my throat. That's not possible, I whispered, though even as I said it, pieces were falling into place. The tension I'd observed, the strange reactions, the secret conversations. How do you know this? I managed to ask. Did Mom tell you? Patricia shook her head. I found out by accident. Last Christmas, I was helping your grandmother organize some old papers. I found letters from Brian to your mother. They were explicit about the affair and about the pregnancy. When I confronted Elizabeth, she confirmed everything. Apparently, she's known from the beginning. Grandma knows. The betrayal cut deeper. Everyone knows, Sophia. Your parents, the Parkers, even your grandmother. Everyone except you, Jason, and Megan. But this is insane. They're about to get married. They've been together for 5 years. How could everyone let this happen? Patricia's shoulders slumped. When Jason first introduced Megan, your parents were horrified. They tried to discourage the relationship without revealing the truth. But the more they pushed against it, the more determined Jason became. By the time they realized how serious it was getting, Jason and Megan were already deeply in love. So they just, decided to let them get married? Their own children. The disgust in my voice was palpable. I've been arguing with your parents for months, Patricia said. I told them they had to tell the truth before the engagement, then before the wedding planning started, then before the invitations went out. Each time, they found a reason to delay. It would destroy them, your mother said. We'll find the right moment, your father promised. I stood up abruptly, the swing rocking violently behind me. There is no right moment to tell someone they're about to marry their sibling. How could they be so selfish? Your mother convinced herself that since Thomas raised Jason as his own, it doesn't really matter. Brian believes that what they don't know won't hurt them. They've all decided that the truth would cause more pain than the secret. The truth will come out eventually, I said. What happens when they have children? When those children have health issues because their parents are related? Patricia nodded grimly. Those are the exact arguments I've been making. But no one would listen. That's why I reacted the way I did tonight, when you said you couldn't wait for tomorrow. Because I know what tomorrow will bring. A wedding that should never take place. I leaned against the porch railing, trying to process the enormity of what I'd just learned. My brother, my beloved brother, was about to marry his half-sister, and every adult in his life who should have protected him had chosen to remain silent. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Why not months ago, when something could have been done more gently? Patricia stood, coming to stand beside me. Because tomorrow is the wedding, Sophia. Because I've run out of time to convince the others to do the right thing. Because now that you know, you have the power to stop this. By destroying my brother's world the night before his wedding, my voice cracked. By saving him from a greater pain down the road, Patricia corrected gently. I'm sorry to put this on you. But I couldn't live with myself if I said nothing. She squeezed my shoulder once, then walked down the porch steps toward her car parked on the street. Patricia, I called after her, my voice small in the vast night. What am I supposed to do with this? She paused, looking back at me with infinite sadness. Now it's your burden too, Sophia. You'll have to decide what kind of sister you want to be, the one who tells a hard truth, or the one who lives with a devastating lie. I watched her drive away, then sank down onto the porch steps, my legs no longer able to support me. The fairy tale wedding we'd been planning for months now seemed like a grotesque mockery. The family I thought I knew had been built on lies so profound I could barely comprehend them. And in just a few hours, if I did nothing, my brother would marry his own sister. I don't remember how long I sat on those porch steps, paralyzed by the weight of Patricia's revelation. Minutes or hours might have passed before rage began to replace shock, propelling me to my feet and through the front door. The house was dark and quiet, but a sliver of light shone from beneath the kitchen door. My parents were still awake. Of course they were. How could anyone sleep peacefully while orchestrating such a monstrous deception? I pushed the kitchen door open with more force than necessary, making it bang against the wall. Mom and Dad sat at the table, cups of tea before them, their faces haggard in the harsh overhead light. They looked up at my entrance, and I knew immediately from their expressions that they'd been discussing exactly what Patricia had just revealed to me. You know, Dad said quietly. Not a question. Patricia told you, Mom added, her voice hollow. How could you? The words tore from my throat, raw with betrayal. How could you let this happen? Mom reached for me, but I stepped back, repulsed by the gesture. Sweetheart, please try to understand what? I nearly shouted, then forced myself to lower my voice, mindful of the late hour. That you've been lying to Jason his entire life? That you're letting him marry his own sister? It's more complicated than that, Dad said, his face etched with lines I'd never noticed before. Then uncomplicate it for me, I demanded, crossing my arms. Explain to me how any of this makes sense. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Mom sighed deeply. Sit down, Sophia, she said. Please. Reluctantly, I took the chair farthest from them both, my body tense with anger. 25 years ago, Mom began, her voice trembling slightly. Your father and I were going through a difficult time. He had been offered a prestigious architectural project in Berlin. A 6-month commitment that would advance his career significantly. I supported his decision to go, but being alone with a 3-year-old, with you, was harder than I anticipated. Brian and Jennifer had just moved into the neighborhood, Dad continued, his voice surprisingly steady. They were friendly, welcoming. Brian offered to help your mother with things around the house, yard work, errands when you were sick. We became friends, Mom said. And then, more than friends. Spare me the details, I said coldly. Patricia already told me about the affair. Mom flinched but nodded. When your father returned from Germany, I was already 2 months pregnant. I confessed everything immediately. I looked at my father, trying to imagine the pain he must have felt in that moment. His face remained impassive, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his mug. I made the decision to forgive your mother, he said quietly, and to raise the child as my own. Did Brian know? I asked. Mom nodded. He wanted to leave Jennifer, to be with me and the baby. But I couldn't do that to your father, to you, to their marriage. We agreed that Thomas would be Jason's father in every way that mattered. And you never told Jason the truth? In 32 years? We never saw a reason to, Dad said. I am his father, Sophia. I was there for his first steps, his first words, every school play and baseball game. Biology doesn't change that. No, but it does change the fact that he's about to marry his half-sister. I slammed my hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. When did you realize who Megan was? Mom closed her eyes briefly. The moment Jason introduced us. Brian and Jennifer had moved to California shortly after Jason was born, part of our agreement to maintain distance. We never expected our children would somehow find each other 27 years later. And you said nothing? You just smiled and welcomed them. We were in shock, Dad admitted. And then we saw how happy they were together. We tried to discourage the relationship indirectly. We suggested Jason was too young for something serious, that long-distance relationships rarely work, that there were other women he should date before settling down. But the more we pushed, Mom added, the more determined he became. Jason has always been stubborn that way. So when pushing didn't work, you just gave up? Decided, oh well, might as well let them commit accidental incest. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. We consulted doctors, Dad said defensively. Discreetly. We were told that while children of half-siblings do have increased risks for certain conditions, it's not as high as people assume. And Jason and Megan had mentioned they might adopt rather than have biological children. You discussed their reproductive plans, but not the fact that they share a father? I was incredulous. By the time they got engaged, we didn't know how to tell them without destroying everyone's lives, Mom said, tears streaming down her face now. Can you imagine what it would do to Jason to learn that his entire life has been a lie? What it would do to his relationship with us, with Brian? How it would affect you? So you decided lying was kinder, I said flatly. We decided that the truth would cause irrevocable damage to 2 families, Dad corrected. That sometimes secrets exist for a reason. A new voice joined our conversation. Some secrets should never be kept. We all turned to see Grandmother Elizabeth standing in the doorway, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, a robe cinched tightly at her waist. Mom, my father acknowledged. You should be asleep. How can anyone sleep with all this shouting? She asked, making her way slowly to the table. Besides, it seems I'm needed. Again. You knew too, I accused, the betrayal expanding to encompass yet another person I'd trusted implicitly. All this time. Of course I knew, Grandma said, lowering herself into a chair. I was the first person your mother called when she found out she was pregnant. I was also the first to suggest that Thomas raise the child as his own. How can you all be so calm about this? I demanded. Don't you understand what's at stake here? Better than you might think, Grandma replied. Secrets have a way of festering, Sophia. I've lived long enough to see how they can poison a family from within. But I've also seen how the truth, delivered at the wrong moment or in the wrong way, can be equally destructive. So, what's your solution? Let the wedding happen. Of course not, Grandma said sharply. But charging off to tell Jason and Megan in the middle of the night, when everyone is exhausted and emotions are high, isn't the answer either. Then what is? I challenged. We tell them together, Dad said. Tomorrow morning. Before anything can proceed. We explain everything, all of us, and we support them through the shock and grief that will follow. That's your plan? Wait until the day of the wedding, when hundreds of guests are about to arrive, when everything is paid for and prepared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's cruel. More cruel than you bursting into Jason's hotel room at Mom checked the clock. 1:30 in the morning to shatter his world alone. Her words gave me pause. As furious as I was with my parents, there was truth in what they said. How would Jason react to learning such life-altering news from me, without the context and details that only our parents could provide? But the alternative, waiting until morning, letting Jason wake up excited for his wedding day, only to have that joy transformed into horror, seemed equally unbearable. I need to tell him now, I said finally, standing up. He deserves to know before he puts on his tuxedo, before he starts getting ready for a wedding that can't happen. And Megan deserves the same consideration. Sophia, please, Mom begged. Give us a chance to do this right. You've had 5 years to do this right, I said, my voice breaking. You've had Jason's entire life. You don't get any more chances. I turned to leave, but Dad's next words stopped me cold. If you do this, Sophia, you need to understand the consequences. This won't just affect Jason and Megan. It will change how he sees all of us, including you, for being the bearer of this news. I faced him, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I know. But I'd rather have him hate me for telling the truth than love me for participating in a lie. Without waiting for their response, I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door and walked out into the night, my destination clear. The hotel where my brother was spending his last night as a single man, unaware that his fiancée was also his sister. The drive to the Grand Willow Hotel took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind raced with the impossible conversation that lay ahead. How do you even begin to tell someone that their entire life, their identity, their love, their future, has been built on a foundation of lies? Streetlights flashed past, illuminating my tear-streaked face in rhythmic intervals. The late-night roads were nearly empty, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of what I was about to do. I'm sorry, Jason, I practiced aloud to the empty car. There's something you need to know about Megan. No, that wasn't right. This wasn't about Megan. This was about our parents, about 25 years of deliberate deception. Mom had an affair. The words sounded harsh, accusatory. This wasn't Mom's fault alone. Everyone had participated in this elaborate charade. Dad, Brian, Jennifer, even Grandma Elizabeth. By the time I pulled into the hotel parking lot at 2:17 a.m., I still hadn't found the right words. Perhaps there were none. Perhaps some truths were so devastating they defied articulation. I sat in my car for several long minutes, gathering courage. The hotel's facade was elegant, its windows mostly dark except for the lobby and a few scattered rooms where lights still burned. One of those, I knew, belonged to my brother. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed Jason's number. It rang 4 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Soph? What's wrong? It's the middle of the night. I need to see you, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm in the parking lot. The parking lot? He sounded more alert now, concerned. Are you okay? No, I admitted. Please, Jason. It's important. There was a pause, then rustling sounds. Give me 5 minutes. I'll meet you in the lobby. True to his word, Jason appeared in the lobby exactly 5 minutes later. He wore sweatpants and a faded University of Pennsylvania t-shirt, his dark hair rumpled from sleep. Despite the late hour and abrupt awakening, he looked happy, a man on the eve of marrying the woman he loved. My heart constricted painfully in my chest. "What's going on?" he asked, giving me a quick hug. "Is it Mom? Dad?" I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The lobby was deserted except for a night clerk who was tactfully pretending not to notice our late-night meeting. "Let's sit down," I managed, gesturing to a seating area in the corner, far from the clerk's curious ears. Jason followed me, concern etched across his features. We sat on adjacent sofas, knees nearly touching across the small coffee table between us. "You're scaring me, Sophia," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, just tell me." I took a deep breath, feeling as though I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Once I spoke, there would be no going back. Everything would change. "I learned something tonight," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something that affects you, affects your wedding to Megan." Jason leaned forward, brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? Is this about Patricia's weird behavior at dinner?" I nodded. "Partly. After everyone left, she came back. She told me." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to maintain eye contact. "She told me that 25 years ago, Mom had an affair with Brian Parker." Jason blinked, confusion replacing concern. "Brian Parker? Megan's dad? That's ridiculous. They only met when I introduced them." "No, Jason. They've known each other for decades. They were neighbors before the Parkers moved to California. The move happened right after you were born." Understanding began to dawn on his face, followed immediately by denial. "What are you saying, Sophia? Just say it plainly." The moment had come. No gentle way existed to deliver this blow. "Brian Parker is your biological father," I said, the words hanging in the silent lobby like physical things. "You and Megan share the same father. You're half-siblings." Jason stared at me, his face completely blank for several seconds. Then he laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed painfully in the quiet space. "That's not funny, Sophia. What the hell kind of joke is this the night before my wedding?" "It's not a joke," I said softly. "I wish it were." "This is insane," he said, standing abruptly. "You're saying that Mom cheated on Dad, got pregnant with me, and everyone has been lying about it my entire life? And I just happened to fall in love with my own sister? Do you hear how crazy that sounds?" "I know it sounds impossible." "It doesn't sound impossible. It sounds like a bad soap opera." His voice rose, attracting a concerned glance from the night clerk. Jason noticed and lowered his voice to a fierce whisper. "Who put you up to this? Is this some kind of sick pre-wedding prank?" "Jason, please," I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Patricia found letters between Mom and Brian. Grandma Elizabeth confirmed it. When I confronted Mom and Dad tonight, they admitted everything." "Then call them," he challenged. "Right now. Put them on speaker and let me hear them say it." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed our parents' number. Dad answered on the first ring, as though he'd been waiting by the phone. "Sophia? Where are you?" "I'm with Jason," I said, putting the call on speaker. "He doesn't believe me." "Tell him, Dad. Tell him the truth about his father." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Finally, Dad's voice came through, heavy with resignation. "Jason, son. I'm so sorry. We never wanted you to find out this way." The color drained from Jason's face. He sank back onto the sofa, legs seemingly unable to support him any longer. "It's true," he whispered, though it wasn't really a question anymore. "Yes," Dad admitted. "But Jason, listen to me. I am your father in every way that matters. I've loved you from the moment you were born. This changes nothing about our relationship. Except that my entire life has been a lie," Jason said, his voice frighteningly empty. "And the woman I'm supposed to marry tomorrow is my sister. We were going to tell you in the morning," Dad said desperately. "All of us together. We were going to explain everything." "The morning of my wedding?" Jason's voice cracked. "That was your plan?" "Jason," Dad began, but Jason reached over and ended the call. For several minutes, he sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. I remained silent, giving him space to process the unprocessable. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were filled with such raw pain that I had to fight the urge to look away. Does Megan know? He asked. I shook my head. No one has told her yet. Jason stood again, more steadily this time. I need to be the one to tell her. Now? It's almost 3 in the morning. Would you be able to wait if you were her? He asked, and I had no answer. The night clerk was openly watching us now, clearly sensing the drama unfolding in his lobby. Jason noticed and said, I need privacy for this. Come up to my room. I followed him to the elevator and up to the 6th floor. His room was a mess of wedding preparations, his tuxedo hanging on the closet door, gifts for his groomsmen arranged on the desk, Megan's picture smiling from the nightstand. The sight of these normal, hopeful things made my chest ache. Jason picked up the hotel phone and dialed. Megan? It's me. I know it's late. No, everything's not okay. I need to see you right now. Can you come to my room? It's important. Please, Megan. Room 612. Thank you. He hung up and turned to me. She's coming. Do you want me to stay? I asked uncertainly. Jason looked at me for a long moment. I don't know, Sophia. Part of me blames you for this, even though I know it's not your fault. You're just the messenger. I can wait in the hallway, I offered, in case either of you needs me afterward. He nodded, seemingly relieved by the suggestion. That would be good. While we waited for Megan, Jason paced the room like a caged animal, occasionally stopping to stare out the window at the dark parking lot below. He didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't ask further questions. His shock had transformed into a terrible, contained stillness that worried me more than any outburst would have. A soft knock at the door came 10 minutes later. Jason froze, then moved to answer it with the hesitation of a man approaching his execution. Megan stood in the hallway, her long honey-blonde hair hastily pulled into a ponytail, wearing pajama pants and a university sweatshirt. Her face was creased with worry. Jason? What's wrong? Why is Sophia here? Come in, he said gently. We need to talk. I slipped past Megan into the hallway, catching a glimpse of her confused, frightened expression before Jason closed the door. I leaned against the wall opposite their room, sliding down until I sat on the carpeted floor. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sound of Jason's voice, then silence. More of Jason's voice, low and steady. Then a cry, Megan's, so filled with anguish that it physically hurt to hear. More voices rising and falling. Something crashed against a wall. Sobbing. A sound so raw and primal it barely seemed human. The hotel door to my right opened, and an elderly man in a bathrobe peered out with irritation. What on earth is going on out here? He demanded. Family emergency, I said weakly. I'm very sorry about the noise. He harumphed, but retreated back into his room. Down the hall, another door opened slightly, then quickly closed. Inside room 612, the sobbing continued. I hugged my knees to my chest, my own tears falling silently. In the space of a few hours, 2 people who loved each other deeply had learned that their love was forbidden, taboo, impossible. Their planned life together had shattered beyond repair, and I had been the hammer that delivered the blow. Nearly an hour passed before the door finally opened. Megan emerged first, her face blotchy and swollen from crying, her eyes vacant with shock. She didn't acknowledge me as she walked unsteadily toward the elevator. I stood and entered the room to find Jason sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. The room was in disarray, a lamp lay broken on the floor, the contents of a gift bag scattered across the carpet. Jason, I ventured softly. Go home, Sophia, he said, not looking up. Please. I can't. I just can't right now. I don't think you should be alone. I've never been more alone in my life, he said, his voice hollow. Finding out that my father isn't my father, that the woman I love is my sister, that everyone I've ever trusted has been lying to me. I need space. Please. I wanted to argue, to insist on staying, but I recognized the futility. This pain was beyond my ability to comfort or fix. I love you, Jason, I said, my voice breaking. We all do. This doesn't change that. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. Doesn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, everything has changed. Every memory, every family photo, Every story I've ever been told about myself, it's all different now. It's all a lie. I had no response to that truth. I simply nodded, then reluctantly left, closing the door softly behind me. In the elevator down to the lobby, I checked my phone. 27 missed calls and texts from my parents. None from Patricia, who had delivered this devastating truth then disappeared, leaving others to deal with the fallout. As I walked through the deserted lobby, the night clerk watched me with undisguised curiosity. I wondered what he thought had happened, a pre-wedding fight, cold feet, family drama of a more conventional variety. How could he possibly imagine the truth? In my car, I sat motionless behind the wheel, too exhausted and emotionally drained to drive. The wedding was certainly off. In a few hours, 200 guests would need to be informed, vendors contacted, deposits forfeited. The practical aftermath of this revelation would be messy and public. But the emotional aftermath would be far worse. My brother had lost not only his fiancée, but his very identity in a single cruel moment. And I had been the one to deliver that blow, forever associating myself with the destruction of his happiness. As the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, I finally started my car. The day of what should have been my brother's wedding had officially begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. I awoke to the insistent buzzing of my phone, having finally fallen into a restless sleep around 6 in the morning. The display showed 9:27 a.m. and 38 missed calls from my parents, from Aunt Patricia, from relatives who had undoubtedly begun to hear rumors of the wedding's abrupt cancellation. My first coherent thought was of Jason. I called his number immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Next, I tried Megan, with the same result. Their phones were either off or they were declining calls, neither of which surprised me. The most recent text was from my father. "We're at the venue. The Parkers are here too. Please come. We need you." I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, not the bridesmaid's dress hanging in my closet, and drove to the Willows. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was heading to the wedding venue, but under circumstances none of us could have imagined 24 hours earlier. The estate looked eerily beautiful as I pulled up the long, tree-lined drive. White chairs were already arranged in neat rows on the lawn. An arch draped with flowers stood at the end of the aisle, waiting for a couple that would never arrive. A team of caterers moved efficiently in and out of the reception hall, unaware that the food they were preparing would never be eaten. I found my parents in a small office near the main building. Mom sat rigidly in a chair, her eyes swollen from crying, while Dad paced the room. Brian and Jennifer Parker stood by the window, as far from my parents as the small space allowed. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sophia," Dad acknowledged when I entered. "Have you heard from Jason?" I shook my head. "His phone's off. Megan's too." Jennifer Parker made a small, wounded sound. She was an elegant woman in her late 50s, her blonde hair so similar to Megan's, pulled back in a tight bun. Her husband stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Brian Parker was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and familiar eyes, Jason's eyes, I realized with a jolt. "This is your fault," Jennifer said suddenly, looking directly at my mother. "All of it. You couldn't keep your hands off my husband 25 years ago, and now our children are paying the price." "That's enough, Jennifer," Brian said quietly. "No, it's not nearly enough." Jennifer's voice rose. "We agreed never to speak of this again. We agreed to move on with our lives, to protect our families. And now look what's happened." "We didn't know they would meet," Mom said, her voice barely audible. "How could we have predicted this?" "You should have told Jason the truth years ago," Jennifer snapped. "Before he ever met Megan, before they fell in love, before we all had to watch them plan a wedding that was doomed from the start." "And you should have told Megan," Dad countered, stepping in front of Mom protectively. "The responsibility wasn't solely ours." "Stop it, all of you," I interrupted. "Blaming each other doesn't help Jason and Megan. What are we doing about the guests? The vendors? There are 200 people expecting a wedding in," I checked my watch, less than 4 hours. Dad rubbed his forehead wearily. "We've started making calls. We're telling everyone there's been a family emergency and the wedding has to be postponed." Postponed. I echoed incredulously. Not cancelled. We can't exactly tell people the truth, can we? Brian said. That the bride and groom just discovered their siblings? The blunt statement hung in the air, making the reality of our situation impossible to deny or soften. The wedding coordinator is helping us contact the vendors, Mom added. Most of them are being understanding about the deposits, given the circumstances. What circumstances did you tell them exactly? I asked. That there's been a medical emergency, Dad replied. It's the easiest explanation. The door opened and Aunt Patricia entered, looking haggard. Uncle Robert followed close behind her, his expression grim. Any news from Jason? Patricia asked, pointedly ignoring the hostile glares from my parents. Nothing, I replied. This is on you, Patricia, Mom said bitterly. If you had kept quiet for one more day, we could have handled this properly. There is no proper way to handle incest, Laura, Patricia retorted. And for the record, I didn't tell Sophia to rush to Jason in the middle of the night. I simply gave her the information you should have shared years ago. Don't you dare take the moral high ground, Brian interjected. You've inserted yourself into a situation that wasn't yours to manage. Someone needed to think about those kids. Patricia shot back. While the rest of you were planning a wedding that should never have happened. Enough. Grandmother Elizabeth's authoritative voice cut through the arguing as she entered the room, supported by Uncle Robert's son Kyle. This bickering solves nothing. Where are Jason and Megan? No one had an answer. My phone buzzed with a text, and everyone turned to me expectantly. But it wasn't from Jason or Megan. It was from Amber, my cousin and fellow bridesmaid. The bridesmaids and groomsmen are starting to arrive, I informed the room. They're confused about what's happening. Dad sighed heavily. I'll go talk to them. I'll come with you, I offered, desperate for any excuse to escape the suffocating tension of that room. Outside, the perfect May morning seemed to mock our family crisis. Birds sang in the ancient oaks that dotted the property, and the sun sparkled on the lake visible beyond the reception hall. In another universe, this would have been a perfect day for a wedding. We found the wedding party gathered near the bridal suite, 3 bridesmaids including Amber, and 4 groomsmen including Kyle's brother. Their faces showed various degrees of confusion and concern. What's going on, Mr. Miller? Asked Cameron, Jason's best friend since college and his best man. No one can reach Jason or Megan. Dad cleared his throat. I'm afraid the wedding has been postponed. There's been a family situation that requires immediate attention. What kind of situation? Amber asked, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Is everyone okay? Jason and Megan are physically fine, I assured her, choosing my words carefully. But they're dealing with some difficult news that came to light last night. The questions came rapidly then. When would the wedding be rescheduled? Should they try to contact Jason? What should they tell other guests who were already on their way? Dad fielded them as best he could, offering vague reassurances that convinced no one. As the morning progressed, the full weight of the cancellation began to materialize. Guests arrived despite our best efforts to contact everyone, requiring repeated explanations of the family emergency. The catering manager approached me with questions about what to do with the food. The photographer arrived, confused about whether to set up. Around noon, I finally received a text from Jason. I'm at Lucas's apartment. I'm safe. Don't try to see me. Lucas was another of his close friends, someone who had not been involved in the wedding party. I shared this information with my parents, providing minimal relief to their worry. Still, no word came from Megan. By 2 o'clock. When the ceremony should have been starting, most guests had been turned away, the vendors were packing up, and our extended family had gathered in the main house, muttering in small groups. The story had morphed and expanded with each telling, though the actual truth remained known only to those of us who had been in that small office earlier. I heard they had a massive fight. I overheard one distant cousin telling another. Something about prenuptial agreements. I heard she caught him cheating, came another whispered theory. I moved through these conversations like a ghost, neither confirming nor denying anything, exhaustion making my limbs heavy and my thoughts sluggish. Uncle Robert approached me as I sat alone on a bench overlooking the lake. Patricia didn't mean for this to happen this way, he said quietly, sitting beside me. Didn't she? I asked, too tired for politeness. She waited until the night before the wedding to reveal a truth she's known for months. She could have told Jason directly at any point, but she chose to put it on me. Robert sighed. She thought your parents would do the right thing once they realized she knew. When they didn't, she felt trapped. But she does care about Jason, about all of you. Caring isn't enough, I said. Not when you destroy people's lives. The truth didn't destroy their lives, Sophia, he countered gently. The lies did. The truth, painful as it is, will eventually set them free. I wanted to believe him, but in that moment, free seemed like the last word I would use to describe Jason and Megan. They were imprisoned by a truth they never asked for, grieving not only the loss of their relationship, but the shattering of their very identities. By evening, the venue was cleared, the guests dispersed, the news thoroughly disseminated throughout our extended family and social circles. We gathered at my parents' house, Mom, Dad, Grandma Elizabeth, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, and me, a fractured family trying to pick up the pieces. Jennifer says Megan is with them at their hotel, Dad reported after a phone call. She's devastated, obviously, but physically okay. They're flying back to California tomorrow. And Jason? Grandma Elizabeth asked. Still at Lucas's. He's not ready to talk to any of us yet. Can you blame him? I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. No, Mom admitted quietly. I don't blame him at all. We sat in uncomfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts and regrets. The doorbell rang, startling us all. Dad went to answer it, returning moments later with an unexpected visitor, Brian Parker. I thought we should talk, he said, addressing the room but looking primarily at me. About where we go from here. Where we go from here? I repeated incredulously. The wedding is canceled. Your daughter and my brother, your son, have had their lives torn apart. What exactly is there to talk about? The future, Brian said simply. Because whether we like it or not, our families are connected. Forever. I looked around at these people, my family, extended and complicated as it had become, and felt a wave of exhaustion so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. In the space of 24 hours, everything I thought I knew about my life, my brother, my parents, had been appended. And now we were expected to find a path forward, to create some new normal from the wreckage of lies and betrayal. I can't do this right now, I said, standing abruptly. I need to check on Jason. I left them there, these adults who had created this mess with their secrets and compromises and misplaced protectiveness. In trying to shield Jason and Megan from pain, they had ensured its inevitability. And in revealing the truth, I had become complicit in the destruction, the bearer of devastating knowledge. As I drove toward Lucas's apartment, I wondered if any of us would ever truly recover from this day, the day that should have been my brother's wedding, but instead became the breaking point for our entire family. 3 months passed before our family began to find its way back to something resembling normalcy, though normal had been permanently redefined by the events of that May weekend. Jason had moved out of his apartment and in with Lucas temporarily, unable to face the home he'd planned to share with Megan after their honeymoon. He took a leave of absence from his job at the architectural firm, using the time to process his grief and anger through therapy. For the first month, he refused to see or speak to our parents, communicating with them only through brief, impersonal texts to confirm his well-being. With me, things were complicated. As the messenger, I occupied a unique position in Jason's pain, not its cause, exactly, but forever linked to the moment his world imploded. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, he finally agreed to meet me for coffee. I don't blame you, were his first words when we sat down at a quiet corner table. I want you to know that. Relief washed over me. I've been so worried about you. I know. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a new seriousness in his expression. I'm not okay, sophomore. But I'm better than I was. And Megan? I asked cautiously. Pain flickered across his face. She's back in California. We haven't spoken since that night at the hotel. I don't know what we would say to each other. I'm so sorry, Jason. For all of it. He nodded, staring into his coffee. The thing is, I'm grateful to know the truth. As horrible as it is, living a lie would have been worse. So thank you for having the courage to tell me when everyone else chose secrecy. That conversation marked the beginning of our healing as siblings. Over the following weeks, we met regularly, sometimes talking for hours about our family, our childhood, the new lens through which Jason now viewed his life. Other times we simply sat together in companionable silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Jason's relationship with our parents was slower to mend. He agreed to meet them after 6 weeks, a tense dinner at a neutral restaurant where more tears were shed than words spoken. Dad, the man who had raised him as his own, struggled most with Jason's anger. I have to redefine everything, Jason told me after that dinner. What does it mean that Dad isn't my biological father? Does it change our relationship? Should it? I don't know how to navigate this. He loves you, I said simply. That's never been a lie. I know, Jason admitted. That's the one thing I've never doubted, even in my angriest moments. Megan had cut ties with everyone involved. According to occasional updates from her mother to mine, she had taken a teaching position in Seattle, wanting distance from both families. She had deleted her social media accounts and changed her phone number. Her way of coping was to create a clean break, a fresh start untainted by our complicated shared history. Aunt Patricia and I formed an unexpected alliance in the aftermath. As the two truth-tellers, we found ourselves similarly positioned in the family, respected for our integrity, but resented for our role in bringing painful facts to light. Truth is a heavy burden to carry, she told me over lunch one day in July. But secrets are heavier still. I was beginning to understand that. The knowledge I now carried of my mother's affair, my brother's paternity, the tenuous foundation on which our family had been built, was indeed a weight. But it was a weight shared in the open, not hidden away to fester and grow in darkness. Grandmother Elizabeth surprised me most with her adaptation to our new reality. At 82, she had witnessed enough family drama in her lifetime to take even this in stride. Families are complicated, Sophia, she said when I visited her at her assisted living facility. They always have been. In my day, we simply didn't speak about these things, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen. But doesn't the truth hurt more sometimes? I asked, thinking of Jason and Megan's devastation. Sometimes, she conceded. But lies hurt longer. They have a way of poisoning generation after generation. Your parents thought they were protecting Jason, but they were really protecting themselves from difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. By August, small gatherings of our immediate family became possible again. Sunday dinners resumed, though with a different quality than before, more careful, more intentional, with a new awareness of how fragile family bonds could be. The Parkers remained in California, their contact with our family limited to occasional formal updates. Brian had attempted to establish a relationship with Jason as his biological father, but Jason wasn't ready. I already have a father, he told me. I'm not looking for another one. Thanksgiving arrived with trepidation and hope. For the first time since the wedding that wasn't, our extended family would gather together, including Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, whose presence had been a point of contention given Laura's lingering resentment toward her sister-in-law. She needs to be there, Jason had insisted. Patricia was the only one brave enough to tell the truth. I want her at Thanksgiving. And so we assembled around my parents' dining table, the empty chair where Megan would have sat as a new daughter-in-law, a palpable reminder of all that had changed. The conversation was stilted at first, carefully avoiding sensitive topics, until Jason himself addressed the elephant in the room. I want to say something, he said, setting down his fork. I've been in therapy for 5 months now, working through everything that happened. And I've realized something important. Family isn't just about biology. It's about love, commitment, showing up for each other even when it's hard. He looked directly at Dad. You're my father. You always have been and you always will be. Biology doesn't change that. Dad's eyes filled with tears, and Mom reached for Jason's hand across the table. I'm still angry about the lies, Jason continued. I probably will be for a long time. But I'm working on forgiveness, because I love all of you. And because I understand that everyone was trying to do what they thought was right, even if they were wrong. His words broke the tension, allowing for more honest conversation throughout the meal. Patricia and Mom even shared a genuine laugh over dessert, a small moment, but significant in its normalcy. After dinner, Jason and I escaped to the back porch, sitting on the very swing where Patricia had revealed the truth to me that fateful night in May. The air was crisp with autumn, so different from the warm spring evening that had changed everything. "Do you ever think about Megan?" I asked quietly. Jason nodded, his eyes fixed on the darkened yard. "Every day. I still love her, Sophia. That doesn't just disappear because we share DNA. Have you tried to contact her?" "Once. I wrote her a letter, telling her that I understand her need for space, but that I'm here if she ever wants to talk. I don't know if she read it." "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe someday when it doesn't hurt so much. When we can look at each other and see just people, not the life we almost had together." "I hope so," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "For both your sakes. Can I ask you something?" Jason said after a while. "If you could go back to that night, knowing what would happen, would you still have told me the truth?" I considered the question carefully, understanding its weight. "Yes," I finally said. "It would always be better to know the truth, even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful." Jason nodded. "That's what I thought you'd say. And you'd be right." We sat in comfortable silence, the porch swing creaking gently beneath us. Inside, we could hear the muffled sounds of family, Grandma Elizabeth's distinctive laugh, Uncle Robert's booming voice, the clatter of dishes being cleared. Imperfect people bound together by love and history and, now, by shared pain and healing. "Family is complicated," I said, echoing Grandma's words. "Family is family," Jason replied simply. "The rest is just details." As we rejoined the others for pie and coffee, I realized that while our family would never be the same, perhaps it could be something new, something more honest, more resilient, built on truth rather than secrets. The fractures would always be visible, like lines in broken pottery mended with gold, but perhaps they would make us stronger in the broken places. 3 months after what should have been my brother's wedding day, we were still finding our way forward. But we were finding it together, one difficult conversation, one family dinner, one shared moment of laughter at a time. And in that, there was hope. If you've ever had a family secret tear your world apart, drop a comment below and share how you got through it. Did truth ultimately heal your family or create wounds that never closed? Hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life family stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most painful truths lead to the most authentic healing. See you in the next video.